Welcome to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans.
This is Lisa Pesnichek.
And I'm Sarah Beckner, and we're here to deep dive into the fascinating world of astrology.
We offer blind chart readings, interviews with notable guests, and much more.
So keep listening as we bring you Insight for Humans. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans. Lisa and I are so excited to be joined today by Merryman Cassels and Maurice Fernandez. And it's one day after the Taurus new moon. And so we're going to let Maurice and Merryman dive in and share a little bit about the astrology of the times. And I would also love for you two to tell us what you're up to next month in New York, what's happening at Omega. So take it away. And if you'd like, Lisa can pull up the new moon chart so we can take a look at that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
As we dive in.
Yeah. Do you want to start there?
Perfect.
Okay. Well,
it was an exciting one.
It was. Absolutely.
It was really exciting in Sedona as well, because we actually had a feast where we shared and enacted the Eleusinian mysteries.
I saw pictures of that. It looked phenomenal.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And is that a part of the work that you two are doing together? I just see these snippets of these beautiful rituals and spaces and celebrations that you create. Can you tell us more about that?
I think it's, we have a wonderful local chapter for astrologers, and there's a lot of sky viewing and ritual. So we try to bring astrology in a living way, in an embodied way. And that is indeed, you mentioned New York. That's what we're trying to do as well on the solstice, the weekend of June 19 to 21st. We are going to have a special retreat. And this retreat coincides with the solstice, obviously, which is in our part of the world, the solar maximum. But also the planet Chiron. It's not a planet, it's a centaur. Chiron happens to move from Aries to Taurus on that day. And Chiron has to do thematically, mythologically, with wounds and healing. And the theme of the retreat is wounds and remedies. And so we're looking at, again, in an embodied way, being in nature, because it's not New York City, it's upstate New York. It's called Omega Institute. It's about a 2-hour train. And Merryman is going to be organizing the journey from the city to the retreat. And so spending time together as a community and diving deep into the wounds and then the remedies, knowing that every planet, not just Chiron, but every planet can represent a particular wound, whether it's a fear of failure, whether it is a physical wound or an emotional wound or a spiritual wound. And that same planet has the codes, the ability to transmute the wound into healing and growth. And so I think it's a great opportunity to use astrology in a way that is embodied and is helpful. And it's not just being in the mind and looking at a chart, but unpacking things. That's most of it.
Is it unpacking things on the personal level for the individuals there, or are you working with more the mundane, the big wounds? Here we are on the Pluto return.
Exactly. One of the presentation is called Healing in the Thick of Planetary Storms. And so I think humanity has been under so much intensity in the past months and year, from COVID. There's so much unexpected twists and turns, and the feeling also of losing trust in everything, in every institution. We don't trust the banks, we don't trust the medical institution, we don't trust the government. And I'm obviously generalizing, but it's a feeling that we're going through a lot and there's not enough integration time, process time. It's like one thing leads to another and another. And even our lifestyle of being, on the one hand, enjoying the technology of being able to communicate here remotely. And yet, do we take time to spend time together? To have a community. We just talked about the ritual that Merryman organized, and it was
So
very cathartic.
it's beautiful. Actually, I work with the Akashic records as well as astrology. And I've been spending a lot of time in the records, which I think is very much sort of a Pluto and Aquarius activity, Uranus and Gemini activity. And just this morning, I had the deep realization of the collective mind. And I was looking back to where Uranus was because I've shared I'm in recovery, a program of healing. And it was founded by Bill W. in 1936. But it really became big in 1941 when the Saturday Evening Post had an article on the program. And where was Uranus? Gemini.
Okay.
It was in Gemini, right? And what I love about this program is we're not healed individually or by one another. We are healed through our collective mind, through our collective healing. And it was a huge aha for me as Uranus is back in Gemini now, that really accessing this collective mind for healing. And I believe I'll be speaking about Jupiter's ingress into Leo. And I was like, it's sacred theater.
Hmm.
It's absolutely sacred theater. It's getting together. It's reliving the mythology, the histories, and also creating our own mythology moving forward. And it's so, and it's funny because I was thinking Bonfires of the Heart, and then I was like, when was Bonfires of the Vanity published? And it was 1987, Jupiter and Leo.
Oh my God.
So it's kind of fun. Realize
Yeah.
this drama, right? We saw in the late 80s, we saw the drama, the bigger, better, more is more. And how do we access this with the planetary lineup we have now? Chiron being in Taurus. I feel like Pluto in Aquarius is also bringing the ancient future forward for us to live, accessing very old codes and bringing them forward now. So there's such an amazing opportunity right now. We can meet this way like we're doing right now. But also when we meet and share theater in the round and share a meal and witness one another and we meet in that collective, amazing.
Do you sense that there's a movement of that taking place, that's happening?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also do dream work as well. So collectively dreaming is another way that we are accessing on another plane, the hive mind, so to speak. And as a beekeeper, witnessing bees for, 24 years now, working with the bees, witnessing in their hive and how they're working collectively, I realize, yes, we are separate, but one.
And to answer also your question, this kind of activation as the planet or the centaur shifts signs and brings a new paradigm, brings a new angle into Taurus, which is about embodiment, which is about being in our own, in nature. With so many planets in fire and air, where the nervous system is so activated, it seems to point in that direction. And there is definitely an overload of technology and overstimulation in general. But I think what I love about our time together and just talking about these planetary cycles, Merriman speaks about the wounds of Jupiter. And we often think, what do you mean, Jupiter? Jupiter is supposed to be the happy go lucky and the good fortune. But there's a wound of indoctrination with Jupiter There's a wound of excess. If you look at the chart of dictators, they're all Jupiterian figures. And Chiron, as it moves into Taurus, squares Jupiter in Leo at the same time. So they kind of ingress together at the end of June, forming this square and learning the remedies of, she used a wonderful term about theater, bringing basically value and embodiment, I think, as one of the methods of transmutation. I think because we live in a world that everything goes so fast, and that also answers your other question about, is it more of a collective healing or is it a more personal chart thing? It's a weekend, so obviously it's not going to be a magic therapeutic personal experience for everyone, but it is a place of resourcing yourself and recharging and knowing you have community, knowing you have a tribe, and being able to just take the time for yourself as well and for your soul. It's soul food. So it's not about miracles and it's not about instant enlightenment or fixing all your problems in a weekend, but the magic of astrology and then some TLC combined is special.
And having Lynn Bell and Rachel Lang there as well absolutely
gosh.
shows out an impeccable lineup of those three astrologers.
All of you. So I've been thinking as you guys have been speaking about how timely it is that we have Chiron moving into this slow, earthy planet as everything else speeds up. And it's going to be covering the tracks of Uranus as well, since Uranus has just been in Taurus. And you guys named this before, but it almost feels like this balm in some way, some healing, some deep healing wisdom that could really ground us. And Maurice, I think you spoke to our nervous system. You actually said it right as I was writing it down, like nervous system. But there is a lot that's been stirred up in Taurus, and Taurus isn't a sign typically that likes to have a planet like Uranus moving through it. It really brings up some of those primary comfort and needs within us. And it almost seems like Chiron could be coming through to help to attend to those. It almost feels like there's a very choreographed dance or performance, to come back to Merriman's words, of these planets moving in this order with one another, which we see over and over again. But this is one that I hadn't really thought of very much. Chiron isn't always front and center in my mind when I'm thinking about planetary movements. And I have been thinking a lot about Leo, or Jupiter going into Leo and that opposition to Pluto, but I didn't really realize that Chiron was going to be sitting there with it, which is
Yeah.
really powerful. When you guys think about that Chiron, Jupiter, Pluto T-square that's going to be happening in the sky, what is some of the energy that you guys will be working with in this time that you have together in Omega? So what are some of your thoughts when you throw Pluto into the mix in this activating T-square?
Well, when I think about Chiron in Taurus, Chiron is both mastery. Wherever it is in your
Yeah.
chart, there is an element of the maverick. And you mentioned Uranus. Now, astronomically, Chiron crosses the orbit of Uranus. And it's actually, when in Aries and Taurus, it's closer to Uranus than it is to Saturn, because it has this weird connective orbit between Saturn and Uranus. She's approving.
And Harry's cat.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a connection, because there's also genius. The genius of Uranus can be found in in
I'm going to go put him up.
okay, in Chiron, but Chiron also represents the descent from being immortal to accept our mortality in the myth. And so there is that, it takes us to Uranus, to the higher spheres, to the genius. And Chiron was the teacher of teachers and was someone who had very humble beginnings, but then became masterful. But then at the end, he had to return to his humble self by accepting his mortality. So you return to Saturn, mortality, time, and being bound to the body that he could heal everyone but himself. And one of the illustration for me that captures Chiron in Taurus is Marilyn Monroe. She's a Chiron in Taurus on top of her chart, conjunct her MC, conjunct Venus. So it's kind of a double. And she is this maverick in Taurian theme. So she's a sex symbol. She's sensual and embodies the beauty and all that Taurus can provide. And yet it's also her wound. It's also her pain that she wasn't taken seriously, that people treated her like disposable or an object. And she went through sexual abuse. She went through professional abuse. So I think Chiron in Taurus brings that remedy. And Merryman speaks of the bees and the sweetness. And we're going to work with that. And yet knowing that the bees sting.
The honey and the sting. Yeah.
Oh.
My kids have been listening to Noah Kahan's, one of his new songs that came out recently. And there's this line that I really love. And it says, whatever made you famous made you sick. And it really, I think that line is just so rich. And it really speaks to what you said with Marilyn Monroe, as well as this Jupiter coming into Leo, opposing Pluto, being square Chiron. Like there's shadows to our talents as well. And I think Jupiter and Leo is something that speaks to that. But I think it's something that might be really coming up as we approach this transit as well.
I've been thinking about exactly the aspects that you're speaking of and thinking about Uranus traveling through Taurus and how we've had so much around our bodies, around our sexuality, how we identify, a lot of statements, confusion, so on and so forth, however it's played out there. But now moving into Gemini, I've thought about how Uranus is like the telepathy tapes emerging and recognizing that neurodivergent thinking may be a part and parcel of the seed of the physical confusion that's happened, whether it's confusion or not. I don't know what word we even will use for it in the future, but the happening, whatever, that we have been through, and recognizing now this potential that we do, whether we are evolving or whether we're recognizing that we have many different ways of thinking, we now, I think, have an opportunity to recognize that we are infinitely untapped as creative beings.
It opens
Beautiful.
definitely, how far can we go? How much is there in us? And that's the beautiful thing about this whole air, fire combo, is that it opens doors to creativity and it's intellectual, it's emotional, but it's very much about birthing things and how far can we go. I suspect, talking about Pluto and Jupiter opposition in Leo Aquarius, I suspect that there are going to be a lot of questions about natality and children and birth rates around Jupiter and Leo. The birth rate decreasing in many countries and the call to have more babies. And how is that working with Chiron in Taurus and ecology, sustainability, the use of resources? We have dreams. We want to populate. And do we have the resources? I think that's where a lot of the shadow comes in, especially in the backdrop of these huge AI Pluto in Aquarius centers that want to power our creativity. We want to do so much with AI, but it's going to drain us dry. The amount of electricity, the amount of
Water.
water that is needed to power these things takes us both to Pluto in Aquarius as well as Neptune in Aries, because Neptune in Aries has everything to do with, can you power your dreams? Can you manifest the vision? But do you have the power? And I mean that in a very sustainable way. Are you strong physically? Is there enough electricity? Do we have enough to follow through on these big visions? And I don't know. That is going to be the question of the next 14-year cycle, as far as I think. Power and sustainability. And Chiron's going to play a big role in that.
Yeah, as you speak, it just makes me think about that Chiron and Taurus, the inherent vulnerabilities of, yes, our resources, our planet, and also our physical bodies, that all of this quickening that's going on in society and that creative impulse is beautiful and amazing and can reshape the world. But fundamentally, what does the human body like? It likes to sleep and wake at the same time every day and take meals at the same time. It likes rhythm
Simplicity.
and consistency. And
The
some
need
of
for simplicity.
yeah, and it's and in terms of talking about the birth rate being down, Maurice, I've heard it said that there are more lobbyists in Washington, D.C. promoting the interests of technology than anything else, than medicine, pharmacology, agriculture, anything else. And a lot of the companies got protections very early on in the late 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of this stuff that we think isn't necessarily related to technology is. Like the birth rates being down, we have basically sold out the mating instinct of our young people to these apps. And the goal of these apps is to keep the young people engaged with the app, to keep them swiping, not to help them find love, not to help them find deep partnership, sustainable love and connection, which would be something that would support the Taurus archetype within ourselves. But it's just to keep feeding these machines of technology. And so there is a light and a shadow, definitely, to what's happening with all of that. And with Uranus moving into Gemini, there's just so much acceleration, I think, that it
Yeah.
does make sense that Chiron and Taurus is going to say something about, yeah, the remedy and what we need fundamentally to navigate these times. But it's also showing us what's vulnerable in the midst of all of this.
And we don't live in a time, in a culture that accepts vulnerability. We live in a culture of achievement, of constantly proving ourselves and outdoing ourselves. And the moment you're in a position of need, you're a loser. I mean, I'm generalizing, but there's a lot of that. And it's interesting when you speak about the generation, because if you look at the planetary cycles, many of the slow moving planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, were and are still partially in impersonal signs. From the 90s, 2000, 2010s, they were in Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, which are very impersonal by nature. And so this detachment from the body, this acceleration of being constantly out of body, is a gift until it's too much. And now that planets are progressively moving into the lower quadrant, the Aries, the Taurus, Neptune moved in, Pluto is still in Aquarius, but then Saturn moves into Aries and Taurus. I think that's going to bring back the descent, the incarnation. We're not just going to float in an abstract, ethereal plane, which is technology for most people, but we're actually going to touch one another and reconnect on a more visceral level. And this is not just an embodied and disembodied thing. Another thing that I've seen with young people, talk about wounds and remedies, is I had a session with a teenager who had chronic depression. And we talk about what's going on. And all he was concerned about was pandemics and the sustainability of fisheries. He was not dating. He was not connecting with his peers. And like you say, there was no sensuality. But these big problems of the world were overburdening him to the point of not having an outlet and ending up depressed. And so that simplicity, like, let's narrow the scope, let's focus on what you should be doing as a teenager. It's not your role to save the world from unsustainable fisheries. I think that's a lot of what this generation is feeling because they're so tapped into the collective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do quite a few readings on young people, and I've noticed that Generation Z, I think because they have such access to data and they're so fluent with it, that they often will jump too. They don't want to be in the muck and mire of making mistakes and failing and muddling around in their lives. They want to get the answer, get the like AI,
Yeah.
just tell you how to, what is your purpose? How to find the, and you can't skip those developmental steps, nor can we carry the grief of the world. Like all of this data is just too much for one human being to handle, to know what's happening everywhere and in all ways. And yet there it does seem to be that the astrology is speaking to some pressure on us to redefine community, to open up the borders in some way as the world just becomes more global. How can we do that without just being completely overwhelmed by it?
But that also just, I want to let you speak too. But, on the one hand, the borders of the world are opening and we see also everything's becoming a small village. But the same way that people feel like everything's too much, there is this panic about wanting to control back the borders everywhere. It's like, no, this is my territory. I don't want to lose myself. The whole anger towards immigrants that is festering and growing everywhere is, I think, part of this need to, everything's moving too fast and we can't integrate it. And who are we any longer? There's loss of self.
Makes me think of hysteria, levels of hysteria.
Mhm.
And another thing about the speed and the overstimulation, I think that another function of Uranus in Gemini is that it actually is transforming our brain
Yes. Yeah.
with Pluto in Aquarius. So if we speak about healing, we are not going to be the same people that we were in the 90s, 80s, 70s, etc. Our physiognomy is shifting. Our nervous system is overstimulated, but it's also adapting
Yeah.
to this new world where it's not just internet and AI, it's going to be outer space stuff and other telepathy, other functions of our nervous system that are being upgraded to be able to cope with the new level of stimulation. But even if you are adapting and morphing and transforming into a super version of a human, you need the Taurus, right, to be able to test it, ground it, integrate. That's, I think, the key word is if nothing's integrated as we spin and spin. So that, just addressing that.
And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about with the Chiron and Taurus is I'm involved with an organization in upstate New York, reconsider.org, which is very forward thinking, very involved with not only the research, but the sharing of the wisdom of the indigenous ways in plant medicines. And I think this is a very critical part of our healing process and our ability to align our own physiology with what is happening around us with the rapid shifts. And Sarah, I'm going to pop off a little bit, but y'all know me. I'm going to have to pop off someplace else. But, Sarah, I was going to ask if you see a lot of children born with the sun above the horizon now. Yeah.
Yes.
Pardon me?
C-sections.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
C-section.
so much more
Correct.
elective C-section.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's affecting our natural order, but I think it's a chicken or the egg question, right? Here.
That's so critical. And I was just posting that I have a group on Facebook called Evolutionary Skies, and we discuss different things. And one of the things we talked about, how do we see our artists in a chart?
Mhm.
And one of the ways is actually a lower hemisphere chart. Many of the big names, many of the successful singers and painters have low hemisphere charts. And when you look at this research where everyone's born with a sun in the fourth quadrant or sometimes third quadrant, but they're not born at night because the doctors is with their families, are we going to lose some of that natural talent,
Mhm.
I think to some degree.
Wow.
Or maybe it's just going to change. Maybe it's going to shift in a different expression. That's interesting. I've been recently doing work with mental health, astrology and mental health, and nearly 100% of my batch of clients who I've been working with who suffer from different levels of mental health are all artists. That is the one constant between all of them is they all have some sort of creative through line. So that's another tangent, but it made me think of that. But I think Taurus also speaks to that need for creativity as well,
Jupiter and
creative
Leo.
expression. And Jupiter and Leo, yeah.
Really, really wonderful opportunities to see how are we going to evolve our creativity.
Ooh.
Expand it, especially with the resources that we have and the population, the way we are evolving or emerging. It's going to be fascinating. Again, I go back to the different patterns of thinking and our recognition of these different ways of thinking and how do we really grow to appreciate different ways of thinking, just as we appreciate people's different ways of expressing themselves in their own physical being.
And I think also just Taurus being Venus ruled, really finding kindness and compassion, which might speak more to Neptune, but understanding that everybody is going through some sort of struggle right now. And it's expressing for everybody in different sorts of ways. I was recently on a podcast with a psychic community, and their community is kind of reeling from the same sort of shift. We're all in it. And I go to my yoga community, and people are just lying on the floor and they can't do their practice. And I mean, it's beautiful and it's a lot. And any of us who have those sensitivities, or even those of us who don't, I think our capacity to just be human, what it means to be human is shifting on some level. And like you said, Maurice, it has to do with our mental functions as well as energetically. I think that speeding up speaks to, if you study energy, almost like a higher energy, a higher frequency that we're probably moving towards.
Which brings an interesting aspect from sound, frequency, music, the healing properties that we very clearly are really experiencing in this time, the way that sound does heal and how sound can coalesce and break apart matter.
And I think that because of everything we talked about, a lot of the therapies are going to increase in the somatic disciplines, where it's not just going to be talking and it's not just going to be analyzing. Doing charts is going to be great, but it's not going to be enough. in order to get to some of these wounds, you're going to need to bypass your own brain, because the brain is becoming so sophisticated that we use it as a defense. It becomes a fortress. And so we need to go to a place where the brain is not going to put up defenses. It's like working around our own defense mechanisms to heal and to be able to change patterns. Another thing to look, Chiron is so fascinating and is so powerful. If you look at the chart of the United States, it's in the fourth house in Aries. And so the United States had a recent Chiron return in the past few years around the time of the insurrection and the whole drama about elections. It's important to look back so that we know a little bit of what is coming next, because planets work in patterns. So the United States is born with Chiron in Aries. We just had Chiron in Aries. And what is Aries? And in the fourth house of the country, Aries is the brave and the free. What's the slogan of the United States? Land of the free, home of the brave. Isn't that a fourth house Aries Chiron? But what do you see with that is that the freedom was in the shadow of slavery. The whole country built its freedom on the sweat of slaves. And that is the absurdity of Chiron. And now we're going after immigrants who build the country. Who are the greatest brains that build the Google? And, Elon Musk is himself an immigrant. Everybody's an immigrant. And there are definitely needs to work on borders and control, be sustainable, do things sustainably. But there is this absurdity with Chiron in Aries that my freedom comes at the expense of your freedom. And obviously that creates wounds after wounds, when in fact Chiron in Aries was supposed to be win-win situations, being able to free everyone, not ride on the back of slaves. And so we hope that as it moves into Taurus, we're going to have similar debates about how do we deal with our resources? How do we deal with our money? What's going on with the economy? I don't know. We talk about sensuality, somatic disciplines, return to art, appreciation of beauty. And you're going to also see entitlement, too much sugar, the excesses. And how are we going to manage that?
Yeah. What are we doing to establish a sense of safety within ourselves or to attain some level of feeling comfort? There are good ways to provide comfort to our human selves, and there are not so good ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you speak about this too, I think of this great divide that keeps getting wider between the haves and the have-nots within the United States, as well as just within the world. And that getting ripped open more with this whole alignment we have coming up, Chiron and Taurus, but also coming up against Jupiter and Pluto. There could be a big Band-Aid ripped off around that time where we're having to really look at that.
There's something about the United States and capitalism that was a remedy for those who lived under oppression. That feeling that you can create your dream, that you can manifest your destiny, that it's up to you, it's in your hands. Don't whine, just do if you want it. But then the problem with capitalism and where the missing link is that it has no place for vulnerability. Yes, it gives you freedom. If it's well done, it's not always the case. And yes, it brings a lot of opportunity, but it's not sustainable to never be vulnerable, to never have a safety net, and to always perform and outperform. And which I think, again, goes back to the Chiron in Aries to some degree. And now, but you mentioned Uranus in Taurus, how it didn't always feel comfortable. But I think the Uranus in Taurus exacerbated the economic gaps, especially in the backdrop of Pluto in Aquarius. And now it's becoming more and more flagrant, more and more jarring to see how much money is spent on a wedding of a billionaire and how much is invested in extravagant, useless projects when they're starting to take food stamps from people. This lack of proportion about how we handle the economy becomes like a caricature. And we have to laugh as astrologers, knowing that Pluto in Aquarius was at the time of the French Revolution. So it was exactly the same plot, the same situation of an elite that was completely disconnected from the everyday life. So are we going to adjust on time? Or is this Jupiter in Leo opposing Pluto going to exacerbate those polarities?
Earlier on, I was wondering about your take on Chiron and Aries. So thanks for addressing that. And I love its position within the US chart. But we also have Neptune currently, and we had the Saturn Neptune conjunction right on the US IC. And now they're both Saturn and Neptune are making their way through Aries, which Chiron just covered. So working through some of the things that Chiron may have kicked up in Aries. What is your take on that? What's your perspective on what that storyline is about?
Yeah, I would recommend I have an article on my website on Neptune in Aries, and I cover some of the main points. One of them is how do we power our lives? And the other one is about Aries is the self and our sovereignty and our ability to be. And Neptune can erase that because Neptune diffuses. So what we're witnessing is people being deleted, people losing their identity, but even being disappeared. We see that in Iran under the oppressive regime of people being silenced or being persecuted. We see that in Gaza, where again, this sense of being deleted, losing your identity, trying to erase you from the map. And it's ironic that the Jewish people have their own battles of, I need to exist, and they've been deleted. And so we see this Neptune in Aries bringing back this need for liberation. But how are we doing this? How are we finding our sovereignty?
That's what I'm wondering about is sovereign communities is really the growth. There are so many conversations out in the zeitgeist around sovereign communities. And a lot of talk from folks wanting to break away from what they call the bill of lading we sign upon our birth when we come onto this planet, born into a hospital and creating these communities. But I think with Saturn there, it's like putting these structures in place. But with Neptune there, it gets very confusing as to how does it actually operate and who actually benefits and who's really part of this system helping it to grow and evolve and who's maybe still benefiting or sucking the resources.
Seems like a precarious time to be a leader or an elite at this time. it seems like there's going to be some shakeups as we move through these next couple years.
I am always, as a philosophy, I don't believe personally in extremes. And we saw how the different systems that were in place, one of them was about all equality. We want equality, we want community. But then where's the individuality? Where is the uniqueness of some people that are different from others? So having different social classes, having different lifestyles is part of the human experience. Some are going to be wealthier than others. Some are going to be more talented than others. Some are going to be more relaxed than others, right? We're not born the same way. We're not meant to have the same bank account, have the same talent, etc. But the problem is extremes. When you get to a position where the exacerbation of the disconnect between the haves and have-nots becomes jarring, then it doesn't work. The system doesn't support itself. But I think how to personalize that, because we can talk about world problems, but how do we operate under these transits? How do we find the energy? Neptune in Aries, I talk about being deleted. Are you finding your creativity? Do you know what you want to do with your life? And if you do, then do you know how to make it happen, how to power that, whether it's with people, whether it's on your own? So a lot of these questions about what do I want to do with my life is very much that Aries Leo interplay.
Yeah. And ultimately, as individuals and in our personal relationships and our families and our friendships and our communities, we are the microcosm of the macrocosm of the collective. And so, really, we can talk about the mundane astrology, but the work really is right here, right now in our personal lives.
Yeah. And when I was reading about the Sophia this morning about Lady Wisdom, the feminine part of creation, it's the pleroma. So she's from the divine fullness, and yet she in her independent desire created the demiurge, which ultimately created the illusion for us that God is within us, but that we don't have direct access. And so I often talk about this time as the return of the oracle, chaotic times as the return of the oracle. And this is really this, when we talk about the divine feminine and the divine masculine, it is much more finding this balance back within ourselves, finding this wisdom back within ourselves, and that this light has been within us. And we are now having this light revealed for us, and we have this direct connection to creation, to Creator. And so ultimately, each of us grounding back into the oracle within and receiving this wisdom as we move forward, and actually being able to share it, to have the knowledge that we're able to share this with one another and work collectively to the higher good is really, I think, the great gift of this time.
I think that might be a beautiful place to wrap up, Merriman, because that's the good work that both of you are doing out in the world. And that's what's going to be taking place at Omega next month and is facilitating that for people.
Absolutely. And I think you hit there a nerve, because we are with Chiron in Aries and all these Saturn moving into Aries, etc. We are at a critical point between the balance of the masculine and the feminine. There's a lot of debate about that. And then what Chiron in Aries, another aspect of that was the wound of the masculine that gave rise to the manosphere, the overcompensation. And what we see is again an imbalance between the empowerment of one at the expense of the other, where many of the wounded masculine are trying to overcompensate. I don't know if you follow what's going on. There are some documentary that are really eye-opening. And so we don't need to put somebody down in order to free ourselves or elevate ourselves. I think that's a big message. And like you say, the masculine and feminine is with us. And the chart, it tells us we all have these archetypes in the chart. It's not just in another person. And so I hope that creating these events and bringing people together penetrate the soul and provides that sense of empowerment. It's not happening overnight, but it allows for the process to get a boost, to be encouraged. And so everyone's welcome. And you can check Merryman's website, you can go to the Omega website, you can go to Maurice's website.
In Manhattan Mystics.
Manhattan.
I have to promote that. So for anyone who's traveling, especially folks on the West Coast who are traveling, a weekend might be a little short, so you can extend your trip. Join me on the 17th of June in Manhattan, and Maurice as well. We are going to have a wonderful couple of days, 2.5 days of Manhattan Mystics. We'll go to see the play Hadestown. We'll learn to read Coffee Grounds with Amir Bey and go to the Rubens Museum, and also some metaphysical shops and dinners and fun stuff. Then we will ride together by train to Omega, so you don't have to worry about the logistics about how do I get 2 hours north of New York City. And so we'll be at Omega from the 19th to the 21st and having wonderful celebrations there. We'll be doing the astrology. We'll be participating in dream work, Kundalini yoga, and celebrations.
Nature.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
I want to go.
I want to go so bad.
Figure out how to make that work.
Those families, right?
I know these kids, these families, but
Bring them along.
I wish.
Thank you so much. This conversation, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd love to just chat for a couple more hours because it stirred a lot of thought for me. So I'll be sitting with this for a bit, and I appreciate you both for making an appearance. And maybe I'm going to try to swing next month. I'm going to take a look at it and see if I can't pull it off.
Do, because it's going to be fun.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
Thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
Really. I mean,
Thank you.
having the opportunity to study and develop friendships and just share this path with y'all, it's such a privilege. So thank you.
Oh, the feeling
Thank
is
you for
mutual.
offering the stage and inviting us and really being generous with your platform.
He's so gracious.
Oh my gosh. And Maurice, thank you for being here. I've followed your work for years and I love what you do. So thank you for your contribution and all the things you do. So thank you.
Yeah. Gratitude. If the whole world could share that.
Yes, exactly. All right, well, we'll wrap up here. Thanks again for being here, both of you. Such an honor. And we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.
Happy New
As always, thanks for listening to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans. If you're so inclined, like, follow, and subscribe, and don't be a stranger.
Signing off for now. Until next time, humans, keep your gaze upwards on the stars and be well. We look forward to sharing more soon.